when buffalo see a storm coming, they run into the storm.
Right.
And the reason they run into it is because they believe that if they take shelter, they're on the plains, so there really isn't a lot of shelter anyway, and they know they can't outrun the storm. So they run into the storm, and the thinking behind it is if I run into the storm, I'm going to get to the other side really quickly.
Right. Yeah.
So sometimes it's safer to actually be in the storm or more productive be in the storm, but sometimes it can be a little bit counterintuitive. So if you've got a whole bunch of things going on in your business and you just want to, sometimes you think, I'll just batten down the hatches, I'll bunker down, I'll wait for the storm to pass. Whereas if you run into the storm, there's a fair chance a couple of things are going to happen. One, you're going to get to the other side much quicker. Two, you're going to learn a heap. You're going to learn a heap about you, your team, your business, resilience, all of those things by being in the storm. And then I said, you're going to get to the other side, but you're going to be better equipped when you are on the other side of the storm.
If you want more time, money, freedom, and have a business that's not reliant on you, then you're in the right place. Each week, Mark Creedon, along with some of the very best business minds in the world, will take you through simple, practical steps you can take to create the business you always wanted. From his own practical experience, Mark will show you how to work less, make more, and get the business you always wanted, the one that you deserve. Now here's your host, one of Australia's most sought-after business coaches, Mark Creedon.
Welcome to the latest edition of the Mastermind for Business podcast. If you are in business and you feel like you're just a bit trapped and you feel like the business is running you rather than you running it, then you're in the right place, because every week in about 20 or so minutes, we talk about some very simple tips and tricks that are going to help get you some freedom back in your business. And as always, joining me in the chair is Nick. Morning.
Morning, everybody.
Good morning, mate. Nice to see you. Nick, I was listening to a podcast that doesn't exist anymore from Gary Keller, from Keller Williams. Now, Keller Williams is the largest real estate agency in the world by agent numbers and the second largest by sales volumes.
Okay.
And he talks about this concept of the buffalo and the storm. Right. So have you heard the story, first of all?
No.
Cool. So the question is, what makes buffalo different from, say, cattle or pretty much any other animal is this. When buffalo see a storm coming, they run into the storm.
Right.
And the reason they run into it is because they believe that if they take shelter, they're on the plains, so there really isn't a lot of shelter anyway, and they know they can't outrun the storm. So they run into the storm, and the thinking behind it is if I run into the storm, I'm going to get to the other side really quickly.
Right. Yeah.
So sometimes it's safer to actually be in the storm or more productive be in the storm, but sometimes it can be a little bit counterintuitive. So if you've got a whole bunch of things going on in your business and you just want to, sometimes you think, I'll just batten down the hatches, I'll bunker down, I'll wait for the storm to pass. Whereas if you run into the storm, there's a fair chance a couple of things are going to happen. One, you're going to get to the other side much quicker. Two, you're going to learn a heap. You're going to learn a heap about you, your team, your business, resilience, all of those things by being in the storm. And then I said, you're going to get to the other side, but you're going to be better equipped when you are on the other side of the storm.
Because you've gone through it, right?
Because you've gone through it. So if you think about, say, tough times, even tough times economically, tough times financially, if you're in a business where, and I had the privilege of speaking at LJ Hooker conference a couple of years ago, LJ Hooker National Conference, and they were there saying that a lot of the real estate agents that had come and joined them in the last 12 months only knew good times, right? They never knew bad times. So when stormy times came, they were kind of lost because it was uncharted territory.
Completely unfamiliar.
Yeah, right. But if you think about it, we'll go back to how this analogy works in life and in business as well. But if you think about it, if you've actually run through a storm, you've got to the other side of it, then you've learned a lot about how to get to the other side of the storm.
It's like experience, right? And the more experienced people will be able to deal with things better than the people who are inexperienced, right?
Yeah, 100%. And if you think about it, say, in your personal life, you've been through some stormy times, right?
Mm.
But if you just, pull the covers over and went, bugger that, I'm not going to deal with that stuff.
Yeah, it doesn't get you anywhere, right?
Well, it doesn't, because the next time in your life, those storms tend to come in cycles, right?
Usually,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
And they come again, and they come again, and they come again.
Yep.
And each time what you want to do is build resistance to it.
Yeah, learn from your past mistakes or previous
Correct.
experiences, right?
Learn from previous experiences, 100% correct. So if we're talking about stormy times in your business, the best thing you can do is to accept that they're going to be there, accept that they're going to come, and then work out what can I learn from pushing my way through it as opposed to trying to hide from it.
Yeah, I think that, something that I've tried to learn as well is change the way I deal with those situations. So I know some people that are just really, really good at dealing with that area. When they're in that space, they actually thrive.
Yep.
And usually it's the people that have a really high energy, positivity mindset.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
And that's something that I probably necessarily didn't have. I would probably be more negative, focusing on what's wrong rather than focusing on the solution rather than the problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think sometimes, and this is again like the power of having the right people around you, because I think sometimes it's very hard to focus on the positive when you're in the middle of the shit show. You know what I mean? Like you just
100%.
Yeah, there's a shitstorm happening around you and the world's sort of all going crazy. I know for me, when those moments, I actually have to give myself a bit of an uppercut. And I have to go, okay, like you'll have the time to give some self-sympathy, but now's not that time.
No,
Right.
now it's time for action.
Now it's time to get on with it.
Yep.
And that's that, when the going gets tough, the tough get going, right?
Easier said than done, though, right?
Oh.
It's a learned practice, right? You can't just pick that up. You have to go through the experience and find yourself a bit to be able to find the best way to deal with it.
I mean, you're right, but in some ways that's kind of what Gary Keller was saying, that's the advantage of going through the storm, right? If you run into the storm to push to the other side, you are going to learn from it. But I think this is really important too, Nick. It doesn't mean, just because you run through the storm, doesn't mean you're going to come out unscathed.
No.
Right?
No.
You're gonna-
Even if you have been through it before.
Yeah, correct.
Right.
You're going to get some damage. I'll tell you what I thought about when I was listening to this podcast was, and they may have mentioned in the show, do you remember Forrest Gump? Do you remember when Forrest Gump and the Sarge were out on the boat, out prawn trawling or shrimp trawling, and the storm came and all the other boats went back into harbour and they stayed out in the storm and they rode the storm out. The really interesting thing is they got a little bit of damage, but the tornado had gone through the harbour and had wiped out every boat in the harbour. So it was a great example where sometimes staying safe in the harbour is not really the best place to be.
Yeah.
Sometimes actually being out in the middle of the storm. But where I was going with that is that if you go through a storm once and you learn something from it, the next time you go through it, hopefully you don't make the same mistakes.
Yeah. Well, that's the plan, but you might come across new mistakes.
Yeah, you
as
might
well,
do.
right?
You might do. But if we go back to that sort of, being on a boat in a storm, you can learn, how better to deal with the waves that come from a storm, or how better to read the skies.
Yeah. You're more equipped to deal with what is going to be thrown at you.
Well, more equipped, I think, emotionally, physically, and psychologically as well to be able to deal with it. How does all of this relate to business and what we talk about, which is kind of getting freedom from your business? I think it's pretty simple. Is that the reality is the tough times are going to come. In your business, you're going to have tough times. You're going to have suppliers that can't supply. You're going to have debtors that don't pay you. You're going to have someone you've supplied and they go broke. You're going to have a really good person leave you. You're going to have all of these issues. You have a tax debt, right? Everyone's going to have these issues that come up. And that's the point at time. That's the storm that you go through and you have to go, right, well, what am I going to do with this? And I think that's where you need to work out, how can I charge into this head first? Not stupidly, not irrationally, but with some kind of purpose and dignity and process to go, all I need to do is get to the other side of this stuff and I'll be sweet.
And it's a little bit like what you said before, where you said, instead of just pulling the covers over your head and pretending like it's not there sort of thing.
Yep.
I think one of the key things to do is to actually assess and understand the problem and the storm itself.
Yeah.
I mean, to really, really break it down and understand what you're dealing with.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that you can attack it, go head on with the knowledge behind you.
I think sometimes, though, the storm will come and you're not expecting it.
Oh,
right?
Most times, I'd imagine.
Right. So I think it was John Lennon used to say, life is what happens to you when you're busy making other plans. There's this great piece of poetry called the Sunscreen Song. Now, Baz Luhrmann was attributed to releasing it, but it was actually written, I think, in a New York article in the New York Times or something back in the 1930s or 1940s, or might have been later than that. Anyway, whatever. But it's called Don't Forget the Sunscreen. If you don't have to look it up, don't forget the sunscreen. And it says sort of things, life is the sort of thing that's going to blindside you one Thursday afternoon at 2:00 when you least expect it. But I think what we've got to do there is when something comes along, like say you got a business and you've got your number one salesperson in your business and you walk in on Monday morning and they go, hey boss, I quit. No idea, completely out of the blue, whatever. They've won lotto on the weekend and they just want to go live in the Caribbean and it's done. But
Bit nice.
Yeah, it wouldn't be. But they're done, right? They're out. And so you can go through, right, well, now you can sort of bury your head in the sand, which is not going to fix it. But I think that's a great example where you can go, okay, I'm going to get through this storm. But more importantly, now what you'll do is you'll prepare yourself for the next storm. So the next time somebody does that to you, you'll be more prepared by having a redundancy in place. Maybe you'll have 2 really good salespeople. Maybe the next person that you replace that salesperson with, you'll appoint an apprentice to learn everything that they can teach them about sales in your industry. So the whole concept is really going, okay, I want to be able to find a way that even though it might be a struggle to get through this storm, how do I prepare myself? How do I protect myself from the next one?
So it's really about having a long-term vision to things, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And, rather than just focusing on the short term, and you're thinking ahead and having that long-term vision can help you deal with whatever comes your way.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And I think the more that you can go, right, this storm thing has come up and I'm just going to push my way through it. I remember many, many years ago, Nick, I got a notification from the ATO of this tax debt, right? And at the time it was like, oh my God, like I'd had an accountant looking after things, anyway, without all the boring, gory detail. It caught me by surprise. And my immediate reaction was, well, I'm buggered now. But then I went, no, you know what? Plan B. I'm going to go find a way that I can generate the revenue I need to be able to pay this thing and get it out of the way. And I just went searching through all of my client lists, went, who can I offer some special service to? Who can I offer a particular product to? I'm hitting the phones, I'm ringing everybody, and got the thing paid off within a couple of months because I just took that on. So I stayed out in the storm and pushed my way through it. But I tell you what, I learned a lot. I've never had a debt since then because I learned to change the whole way that I operate, the way I pay my tax and make sure that, I'm paying things monthly, etc. And also finding a really good accountant.
Yeah. So I guess learning from that experience has helped you with the future experiences.
Yeah.
Right.
So I pushed through that storm. But more than pushing through that one, I learned to be ready for the next time there was a storm that we're ready for it.
Yep.
All right, so that's the concept of the buffalo and the storm. We spoke a little bit about employment, and in just a second, I want to talk about some of the things that are really important to think about when it comes to recruiting and retaining people. All right, so Nick, we were talking before about, you come in on a Monday and your best person leaves. I want to go the other way and go, what happens when you have to let somebody go? Now, I want to make it really clear. I'm not an employment lawyer. I'm not a HR specialist. I'm not talking here about Fair Work Act or any of those sorts of, so please get your own advice on that. Here, I'm simply talking about the way you think about and the way you operate your business if you've got employees, if you've got a team. I got this great quote the other day, and it was that if ever you have to dismiss someone, it should not come as a shock.
To who?
To them.
Right.
Right. So anytime you have to dismiss someone, they should not be shocked.
Okay. Like they're seeing it coming sort of thing.
Yeah, and if they are, then it means that you've not done your job properly in letting them know that things weren't working.
Yeah, you haven't given them the right warnings or kicked out the bum when needed or whatever.
Yeah, correct. Course correction, advice, accountability, any of that sort of thing. So a little while ago, I had the experience of having to let someone go. And I remember when I had the conversation, he just said to me, yeah, look,
Seeing it coming.
It makes sense. I've been thinking that this conversation was, every time I see you, I've been thinking over the last couple of weeks, we're probably going to have this conversation sooner rather than later.
Right.
So, and I mean, the good thing about that is we were able to leave on very amicable terms and we're able to help him to find something else. But the other thing about it, I think, is that it's just this great, I just love the concept that if you're going to have to help get somebody out of your business, it shouldn't be a shock to them. If you've done your job properly, then you've let them know in advance that this is coming. You've let them know that there's issues with their performance or there's issues with the performance of the business as a whole, or
you've given them the opportunity.
Yeah.
Right. I think sometimes, I've been let go from roles before, and my experience on one role that I was let go from was the exact opposite.
Well, I was going to ask you about that because back in your younger days, you hopped around a little bit trying to find where your happy place was.
Yeah, professionally, by the way, let's just
clear
that up.
Yeah, professionally, yeah. Trying to work out, what you wanted to do, right? And there were a couple of roles you left.
Yep.
And there were a couple of roles where you were helped out the door.
Sure.
And I imagine there would have been a role, at least one, where you were helped out the door, but you knew it was coming.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah, definitely. And I can remember one time got called into the office with someone in one of the sales roles that I was doing, and they said, look, it's just not working out. And my first reaction was, yeah, I thought this was coming.
Yep.
I could see this coming, and I thought, same sort of thing. I thought we were going to have this conversation sooner rather than later.
Yep. But then you had another experience where it blindsided you.
Yeah, completely. Where I'd just moved houses to be closer in the area.
Yep.
They just approved that for the application for the property and stuff. They just approved that, I was going to be employed there for the next 6 months or foreseeable future, however they word it. And then that afternoon I was called into the office and given that that discussion. So I think that was poorly done. And that was a shock on my behalf. And then not only did I have to deal with that, they had to deal with it. Right? So it was actually not a good experience for them all round because they're having to deal with me.
Yes.
After, being in that situation with a complete shock where I didn't see it coming. And that wasn't a nice place for me, but it certainly wasn't a nice conversation for them to have either.
No. But you know what? I just sort of look at that and go, shame on them, because if you weren't performing to acceptable standards or you weren't doing what they had hoped of you, whether their expectations were realistic or not, we'll park that for a moment.
Yeah.
But I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that if you've got somebody working for you, and leaders have to have tough conversations, and I hate having them. I don't like tough conversations. I
think you're a sick bit twisted if you do like having those conversations, right?
That's right. I mean, I don't like conflict, but hey, if it comes my way, I'll step up to it.
Yeah, I think that just comes back to communication.
Yep.
Right? If you're communicating with your team and you're letting them know what their position is, where they're sitting, where you're sitting, how you're feeling, it just opens up a much better line of communication so that when you do have to have that conversation, if you do have to have it, it's, as you said, both parties can sort of sit there and walk away feeling okay with how things have been handled.
Yeah, that's right. And everybody hopes that you walk away, if not friends, but at least amicable.
Sure.
But it should at the very least be a civil
100%.
Right.
Yeah.
A civil departure. And the only way I think it can be civil is if there's been, as you say, true and honest and open communication. And the number of times where I've seen people where they have been surprised, it's just been because they had no idea. Like, they had no idea. I've spent most of my adult life in business. I've only had a couple of jobs, and I think I've only been sacked in one of them. But man, I think it was coming.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have sacked me weeks before they did.
I've been in similar situations as well. And yeah, I think you can sort of see it but part of that is also because, you've been given the conversations beforehand. You've been given the warnings, or, some places have the set process where they give you the 2 written warnings or whatever it is. And you can, you're not hitting your targets or whatever.
Yeah, whatever it might be.
Whatever it might be. So you can sort of see it coming because you're not living up to the expectations or the standards of what they're after. Where, we were speaking about the role where I was let go from, where I didn't expect it. It was presented to me as completely, look, it's just not working.
Yep.
There was no targets not being hit. There was no warnings given beforehand.
Attitude's not right, whatever it might be.
It was purely just like, we just don't think it's going to work out long term. So we're going to chop the head off now while we can, which just wasn't handled well.
No.
So there's 2 ways to do things, right? Well, there's a million ways to do things, and that's the way you don't want it to. Because as I said, it was uncomfortable for me, but it was certainly uncomfortable for them. And I made sure of that too.
I can well imagine. But I think the really important takeaway here is this. If you are, and I'm going to close the loop here, if you are employing people, even if they're outsourced or subcontracting, and they're not performing at the level that you want them to be, whether it's performance, whether it's attitude, whether it's timeliness, whatever it might be, you've actually got to have that conversation with them. And this is where I close the loop about the buffalo and the storm, because that of itself is a very, very small storm, but you have to run into it. You have to charge that thing. You have to push into it. And what will happen is you will get to the other side of it much quicker. You will learn a heap from the process, and both you and that team member will learn from the process as well. And it'll help you to work. I often find that if ever I've had to let somebody go or somebody's quit, I've often replaced them with someone better because I've learned more about that role or about what it is that I do or don't want. So invariably, even when somebody really great leaves, invariably I replace them with somebody even greater, because I've learned more about it. And so this is an example of charging the storm. And as leaders, that's what you've got to do. You've got to have tough conversations. You've got to face that stuff, and you've got to deal with it, and you've got to challenge it head on, and you've got to push to the other side. So I think it's a great metaphor. I love it. And you can see already a couple of ways that we could use it.
Yeah, 100%. I think the other side of things as well too is that, it can happen the other way around. It can be someone that's really good that you've got in a role that you think is really great, and then all of a sudden they surprise you and they decide to leave.
Yeah.
And that's something that, maybe you've got to reflect back on and look at. Did I provide them with everything that they needed? And to get someone else like that, because you want people like that in your business. If you enjoyed it, they were doing their job and they were succeeding or whatever, living up to your standards and expectations, and they've decided to leave at the drop of a hat and surprised you. Well, that's probably
Yeah.
back on you, and probably, you haven't probably asked the right questions. You haven't had that line of communication with them to be able to sense that that was coming.
Yeah, it's a really good point you make, actually, because it is a two-way street. We had somebody leave us not long ago that just blindsided me. It was the last thing in the world I expected. But when I look back on it, I think two things. One, probably could have had better communication. But two, I think it told me a lot about them and their values.
Mm.
And so whilst they were brilliant at what they did, the fact that they chose to leave the way they did, in the end of the day, I feel like we dodged a bullet
They really
because,
weren't the right fit.
yeah, because it said to me, well, hang on, actually, there's, because I was sort of going, well, I wouldn't do it that way. And I sort of had to stop and go, well, that's because they're my values and clearly not theirs. So if there's a clash of values, then we're better off parting way anyway.
No matter how good they are, right?
Yeah, that's right. So actually, while I was initially I was surprised and pissed off and frustrated, I was kind of grateful in the end. Interesting how it all turns, eh? These are the sort of things that we teach our clients all the time in our mastermind program, metropolemastermind.com.au. Love to have a chat to you about how we can help you get more time, more money, and more freedom out of your business. Until we chat next. Thank you, Nick. Always good. And please make sure you spend time with those who matter most. Talk to you in the next episode.